Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to let our guest, Miss Melissa McShane, introduce herself to our listeners and viewers at home.
Hi, I'm Melissa McShane. I'm the author of many fantasy books in several different fantasy subgenres, including historical fantasy and contemporary fantasy, as well as secondary world fantasy. And I am coming to you live from India right now. I live in Kerala, which is in southern India. It is a beautiful morning where I am. And this is our winter time. This is the best time of year as we're recording in January, February. Best time of year to come here and visit. The weather is great. And so I'm really excited to be here.
Do they get like a rainy season too? I know India is so big that there's so many distinct weather regions. It would be hard to guess, but I know they get monsoons, don't you?
Yes, we have a summer that lasts through April and like the first couple weeks of May. So maybe 5-6 weeks of summer that is brutally hot and nobody likes it. And then after that, we get the monsoon season, and then we have a little period of dryness, and then we get another monsoon. And I love the monsoon season. I love the rain. It just pours and pours. It is beautiful. So I really this is a great place to live. We've really enjoyed being here.
Enough to stick around when his contract ends, or
no, I don't think so. No, we have an end date ahead that we're looking at, but another couple of years. So
yeah, it's a cool place to be for now, though. Although you miss your books, I'm sure.
I do. I miss my library. I've recreated my library here. I've got like 150 books that I bought. So I have a little mini library.
Somebody needs to build like an app or an add-on to the Amazon page, because I've got so many books that I bought just because, it's 99-cent sale, let me get it. And then I forget it. And so I don't even know what's all in my Amazon library. If someone ever made a searchable app where it would just scan your Amazon account and then like populate it into something.
I agree. Yes.
I would pay lots of money for that, just so that way I can I finally had to make a spreadsheet for the new stuff I'm reviewing, because I do reviews for Upstream, which we've talked about on the podcast before. Yeah. And I just made a spreadsheet for all the books that I've gotten to review or have been given to me for review, because obviously those get priority, because I had to track it somehow.
Yeah.
But I'm sure the books I bought 3 years ago that I forgot about are still there that were never read.
Right. That's right. And you need to know. I have a powerful library database that I use that I track. I went through. My husband usually uses Kindle Unlimited, so we have relatively few. By relatively, I mean like 400 books that we've actually bought on Amazon as ebooks. And so I went through that and I cataloged the ones that I cared about. And so I now have a record of the ones that I might be willing to read, because our account is shared, and so he'll buy books and his tastes are different from mine. I keep track of what I have and where I have it.
The other part about that is I would wish there would be a way where you could just download all of them in bulk because you paid for them. Whereas if I die and I hey kids, read these books, right? But no, they'd have to start all over again.
That's right. Yeah. I agree. I'd like to be able to do that. I think it would be fun.
That's where you get the whole
great ideas.
That's where you get the whole DRM, digital rights management arguments about, do they own it once they buy it? Amazon and Apple say, no, you're actually just leasing it from us, which is how they justify if they determine later that the author violated terms of service or terms of use. As nebulous as that can be, they can pull all of their content. And if you've bought it but haven't read it, yours is gone too.
Well, and they can force an update to the text too. I mean, because they've got the right to it. And so if they decide that there's something problematic about your book, they can force a change and you can't do anything about it.
Now, the author can't be forced to do it. Their choice is you could pull it too. But as a reader, your only choice is take the update.
That's right.
So,
yeah, if
the
you're a
authors
reader,
have the right the
Yeah,
readers.
the authors have control over it, or more usually when that happens, it's a publishing company that owns the rights to the author's book. But yeah, it's the readers that end up having to take that automatic update.
Yeah, the publishing company or the estate, because I mean, there's a whole
Right,
big
the estate. Yeah, that's another thing too. The estate of the author.
So we are recording this at the beginning of February, and it'll be airing mid-February. Normally, the air date to when we record it is generally about a month, but this one we are mixing some things up because I promised you air dates for episodes, and then you had to go back to America and got time zones all mixed up. So we had to scramble to adjust. So
yes, that's fine.
But that did lead to a new set of religion questions for us today, because we just recorded yesterday a review that you'll hear, listener, in about 2 weeks after this one, where we talked about the Fallout franchise, and your husband is a super fan, so we had him come on and get nerdy with us. And he mentioned that you didn't like the Fallout series because it was too violent for you. It just didn't meet your tastes in that regard.
Well, specifically the Fallout TV show was graphic enough that, because it was funny because I thought going into it, having seen him play, I don't play the game, but I've seen him play it because it's so cinematic and it's so wonderful. I'm just not good at that kind of game. So I've seen him play it and I know the kind of violence it is. And so I thought, well, that's fine. I'm good with that level of violence because I don't have a problem watching the game. And then I was really surprised when I went into the show and it's like, oh, this is surprisingly past my tolerance level. And it was sad because I could not stop thinking about that first episode. It was really good. And so I was talking to my husband after the podcast and saying, I really need to at least watch one more episode and see if that's still the case, because I loved the story. I was really interested, and they did such a good job of making that world realistic, and characters are interesting. So anyway, that's the story behind that. Is I was surprised to find that it was too much for me. Because apparently the visual of live action is different for me than, say, a game or a comic book.
Fair. For me, it was just so powerful seeing like the Brotherhood of Steel powered armor actually envisioned in person.
Yeah.
And how much like bigger it was than the occupant. Because some people do power armor, you think Stormtrooper, where it's pretty much form fitted to you, or like Iron Man kind of deal. But this is more like, I don't know, Warhammer. I don't know enough about Warhammer to say. Well, it's definitely the guy inside is smaller than the suit itself.
Yeah, I thought that was great.
And I really enjoyed seeing that. I enjoyed the representation of the 1950s vibe into the future, especially when you opened up with the scene in the bunker, in the vault, I should say, what they call them. I really dug all that, like that 1950s aesthetic, but with some darkness or some twists.
Yeah, it was really cool.
Although most people that talk about like, the 1950s was so idyllic, and I'm like, do you not know what was going on behind the scenes? Clearly, you have not studied your history, because that was like prime Korean War, Cold War.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff. It's they've seen a few sitcoms set in the 50s, and they think that's real life, or the Norman Rockwell posters, which they're stunning. I love them.
Those are great. Yeah,
I'd hang a few of those up if I came across them. But yeah, so because of that, though, I tailored the religion questions just for you today, because you've been on so much. Rather than get the same old or mix up that kind, I went for family friendly, just so we could get to your taste. So, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Flight of the Navigator, or Short Circuit. Okay,
so I think Flight of the Navigator is the weakest of the movies in terms of storytelling and stuff.
Okay.
But my family was a big fan of that movie, and so we watched it a lot, and so I have nostalgia associated with that. So I would go with Flight of the Navigator for that reason. It's just it's so much a part of my childhood.
I watched all of them, so like they're all okay in my book. But Short Circuit had so many good quotable lines.
Oh yeah,
Number 5 alive, no disassemble.
No disassemble.
Your mama on the snowblower.
So yeah, so like I said, I think Flight of the Navigator is probably the weakest of them, but I have a soft spot in my heart for it.
Absolutely. All right, and because we are polytheistic here at the Blasters and Blades podcast, The Princess Bride, Labyrinth, or the never-ending story?
That one's tougher, but I am a super fan of The Princess Bride. I have read William Goldman's works on, writing about having made the movie. I've read Carrie Elwes' making of the movie book. It's called As You Wish, and he talks about the behind the scenes stuff. And I've read the book a gazillion times, and so getting the movie into production, bringing that book to life, just no question, it's The Princess Bride.
That poison scene is the most like memed thing I've ever seen.
Yes.
I know that you know that you know that I know that I, and like he goes on, like that was so perfectly sold.
Yes.
That is right up there with the death scene at the end of the Buffy the movie.
Oh yeah.
As far as
Yes.
My understanding when I've watched some of the behind the scenes, he took it a little bit further than the script called for because he was just leaning into the absurdity of it. I'd have to go back and revisit. Like, I had a period of time where I was curious about, like, before I started writing, but I was curious about the story behind the story. Because I took a historiography class in college, which is literally the history of history. So it's not the history of the event; it's the history of our understanding of the history of the event.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so it's meta way to look at the world, but it went down a path where I was like looking at that kind of information about how movies and stories that I like were created. And if my memory serves, and that was before the brain damage, so who knows? But that was one of those scenes where the actor ad-libbed a little bit and they liked it.
Oh yeah.
Right up there with Indiana Jones, and throws the pistol down, or he throws the weapon down and shoots him instead.
Yeah.
But he was technically out of bullets because the actor was sick and tired and like, I just want to go home. And they left it because
so good. Yeah, it was so good. Yeah.
Yeah, and so there's a couple of scenes in there where people, like, just in general in Hollywood, where they were not intended to go that way, but sometimes the mess up was just too good to delete.
They leave it in, yeah.
I'm pretty sure The Princess Bride had a few of those scenes as well.
Oh yeah, They had. I really recommend Carrie Elwes' book, but listen to the audiobook because he reads it himself, and it's just you're right there because he's recounting all this stuff that happened on the set and all these things about the different actors and what they did and how they were, how they were friends and they did all this stuff together and just all these little details. It was so good. But definitely the audiobook, because the audiobook is it just adds something that he's the one reading it.
Okay, I know the scene where they have the great sword fight on the ruins, where Andre the Giant's character is there, and some of those facial expressions were real because apparently Montezuma was getting his revenge after lunch, and so he was just letting it all riff. Like you didn't hear it on the camera, but they could definitely smell it, and it affected things.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah,
and it just sold that scene. That man was a good character actor.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And so because you've been on the show a lot, we did want to mix it up a little bit, but because you are deep into writing was it 9th or 10th book in the War Master series. So we're going to ask you, instead of your favorite dinosaur and your favorite zoo animal, because you've answered that a few times, what's your favorite creature from a monster manual? Since you play a lot of tabletop games.
Okay. So from the D&D monster manual, my favorite creature is actually the Beholder. And some of that is because I was commissioned to paint a miniature. This friend of mine, he liked having miniatures, and he liked monsters and he liked big monsters, but he was terrible at painting and he did not enjoy painting for that reason. And so he came to me and he said, "Hey, would you like to do this?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure. I'd jump at that." And I just like the randomness of the creature and how many different things it can do, and how it's even more than that. It's legendary enough that it's like you say you come upon a beholder and everybody in the party goes no, and even if they're high level and they can take it, it's got that mystique to it. So that would be my creature from the monster manual. I like monsters. I am very fond of monsters, and I love creating monsters for the War Master series.
I know the Beholder has that lore with it when it comes to like D&D, but if you're talking about like mythical creatures, for me, that would be a pain in the butt to fight. I always go back to Medusa.
Medusa, yes. That one's tough. Medusa is tough. And that's got lore to it too. I mean, you think about the people who write and rehabilitate the Gorgons to be like misunderstood creatures, which is also interesting. I like that too. So.
And when you think about like Medusa, though, like the snake's head, looking at the snakes will petrify you. But when they look at each other, do they petrify themselves?
I have always wondered that.
So what happens if you shine the mirror?
Yeah, and like reflect the, maybe that's what it is, because isn't that how he defeated the Medusa, was like the shield was really shiny?
Yeah, I think so, but I don't know if it was because
It's been too long.
Yeah, and then the other one is like, if you look at them through glass, are you getting some level of protection? Because like UV rays often don't go through glass. And so how that affects the modern lore, because for instance, the vampires don't see themselves in mirrors. Well, why?
Right.
In the day, the mirrors were backed by silver, and the vampire silver, lore. So what happens if you get a modern mirror that doesn't have silver on it? Are they now still invisible? Right. And so when you start looking at updated technology, how that affects the lore is just fun to think about.
Oh yeah. I'm going to have to remember that for the Medusa, because I may need more monsters coming up for writing a sequel series. And that's an interesting one.
Oh, and I told your husband about my mom misunderstanding. So now she wants us to write the War Hamster.
Yes, the War Hamster series. We will do that.
No. She thought I was saying where, not war.
Oh, where hamster. Where hamster. Okay.
She's been into Shifter, so now she wants us to write the Where War Hamster, or I guess order. It was like Who's on First, Abbott and Costello bit when we were having that conversation, and your husband was dying, and he's like, "Yeah, you have to put that in there."
Yeah.
So it's a where hamster that is a war hamster.
War hamster, the where war hamster. Oh my gosh, that's funny.
And our narrator will hate us.
Yeah, that's probably true.
I can just imagine now the hate mail we will get. Yeah. It'll be glorious.
It'll be great. It'll be wonderful.
And so obviously you've talked about it before, but you don't really do the coffee or tea because religious convictions. But so I will remind you, dear listener, that we are still affiliate marketers with the Coffee Brand Coffee. So link is in the show notes. Podcast Grunts, get you 10% off. They have good coffee. I drink a lot of it. It's my gourmet coffee go-to. But since you can't only say you can only say Dr. Pepper so many times before people are like, I get it already.
That's Jana. I'm Coca-Cola girl. So Jana's the Dr. Pepper fiend.
A lot of your people like the Dr. Pepper though. So I'm used to hearing
Yes, they do.
That.
Well, it's a religious war with us. Is it Diet Coke or Dr. Pepper? And
I actually like establishments that have Pepsi instead of Coke, because then I can force myself to drink water because I hate Pepsi. So I'm like, well, I'm not paying for a drink at this establishment. At least I saved $4.
That's right.
But so since I'm not going to ask you, obviously, when can't answer the question, I'll ask you instead. So if you got sucked into one of these fantasy worlds, game worlds, whatever, what food or beverage would you miss the most?
Okay, so I have found that there are so many different fantasy worlds, and I have done this with my own fantasy worlds where it's based on a real world culture. Like in the War Master series, the southern part of the continent is fantasy India, and so they have Indian foods. But I think if you were to be transported to, say, a medieval fantasy world, then the food that you'd miss is different than if you were transported to fantasy India. And I would say, for the most part, pasta is the thing I would miss, because I've found that there are very few fantasy worlds that incorporate pasta as one of the food items. And I would miss that. I kind of miss it here because it is hard to get. Well, that's not true. They have lots and lots of pastas, but it's either penne pasta or spaghetti. And that's pretty much it. So you can get pasta anywhere if you're willing to get one of those two. So I would miss angel hair pasta and
So I don't even know how pasta is made to see if that's something you could do without the modern processing
oh yeah,
process.
I think you totally could. You just need something to roll it out and cut the noodles. But in fact, I think Jana makes her own pasta noodles for chicken noodle soup.
Interesting.
So you could do that if you were, a better cook than I am. You could do that.
Okay, that's good to know. Like I said, it's one of those things where some foods you can recreate, or that that's where you
Right.
get the old joke
Mhm.
though. Like if I'm going medieval, like we've got to define terms and where, because the running
Yeah.
joke is England conquered the world, stole their spices, and used none of them.
Yes.
And so like I don't know, but then you think about it back in the day, like what we keep in our modern spice cabinet would be worth a king's fortune.
Oh yeah, no kidding. I mean, the stuff I
Um,
get here is like you have no idea the variety of spices they have here. And
Now, can you
like,
take those home with you on vacation when you go home on your
yeah,
leaves or whatever? Can you bring spices home?
if I get them from the grocery store, yeah. Um, they, I mean, because it's no different than going to the grocery store in the U.S. I don't, in general, bring spices back, but I could. They've got like 50 gazillion types of chili powder, and there's masala, and there's oh geez, I don't remember. But anyway,
So you
you go
could
to
get
the
like the
store and they
fresh stuff, because I know generally
yeah.
it's weird when you want to move food across
Yeah,
international.
they wanna know, sometimes, and it's interesting coming through customs in the US. um, we frequently come through Salt Lake, because we don't do this anymore, but we used to fly from London to Salt Lake, and that was where our entry point was. And it was interesting that every time we went through, it was a different experience. So they didn't have a solid list of questions they would ask you, and some people wouldn't ask anything. And maybe I shouldn't be saying that because I might get them in trouble. It's not like anybody knows who they are, but um, so it's different each time. But yeah, in general, they don't want you bringing plants because there's risks of contamination and stuff like that. And the same thing, going there. I was thinking it would be nice to have a real big tomato plant, for like beefsteak tomatoes, because here it's more like Roma tomatoes is all they have, and they're good, but they're not large. And I like tomatoes, so we talked about. Well, could you do that? And so I looked into it, and it's this whole big deal if
What
you
about
want
just
to
the
bring a
seeds?
plant. Even the
Wow.
seeds, if you want to bring them in, yeah, it's just a whole big deal. And so theoretically, I could probably do it, but I would be breaking the law, and I would not really want to break the law over tomatoes of all things. I mean, that's just not worth it.
Oh, not at all. So I know when we came back from Iraq, that we went through customs as well,
Hmm.
and they wouldn't let us bring any of the food that you'd bought at the bazaar or the AFES or
Yeah.
whatever.
Hmm.
And so the only reason I was able to keep a can of Diet Coke with the Arabic writing olive, and it's not like we have the pull tab. Theirs was different. It was like a pull tab, but with like a tin foil over it, and you're just pulling the foil up
Oh.
tab as
Uh-huh.
opposed to the way we think of the metal can where you click it in
Right.
and it bends and whatever.
Yeah.
Theirs
Uh-huh.
was more like a pull up, like you see on
Uh-huh.
some of the tomato juice jars.
Right. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
how they made the
That's
cans over there.
strange. Yeah.
And so I was able to bring one home though, only because it was like, oh, this is just my drink for the plane ride home, and then I just didn't drink
Hmm.
it on the
Yeah.
plane, and I
Yeah.
brought it home. But
Hmm.
like I know if that's what we went through with the military, I imagine, and they were giving us probably more leeway because we're returning from where we were. So I have to imagine it's worse for the civilians who don't,
Yeah.
have that little bit of goodwill already bought with the customs people.
Yeah. Hmm.
So it's definitely something I think about. I know like the fresh spices can make all the difference when you're cooking.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
tend not to because it's a pain in the butt and you got to use it before it goes bad. And
Right. Hmm.
there is some convenience to the processed stuff, but it
Hmm.
definitely makes flavors pop enough to might
Yeah.
be worth it just once to bring it home,
Yeah.
So I
Hmm.
don't know. I would miss pizza, but if you've got a bread oven
Hmm.
and you've got
You can
access to bread
replicate
and
it.
tomatoes, you could recreate it.
Yeah, you could.
I don't know how much like pizza as we think of it now it would be like, probably more like the original
Mhm.
pizzas.
Yeah,
Um,
probably. Hmm.
but I'd still try. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and if you've got fantasy world, they've probably got magic. So why not magical
Yeah.
heating elements in
Right.
your
Yeah.
pizza oven? In which case you get a uniform cook temperature.
That's
Because
right. Yeah.
anywhere that has magic tends to use magic in lieu of technology. So I just assume
Mm-hmm.
I can replace it.
Yeah, that's what I
Um,
think. Yeah.
so for
Find
me, like
somebody.
I would miss pizza. I would miss nachos. That's my comfort food. And
Oh.
I like a lot of the Chinese, well, Americanized Chinese foods. So like
Mm-hmm.
the sesame chicken or the General Tso's. I don't know if they actually eat that kind of stuff in China, but we do here, and it's delicious.
Well,
And the pork
they
fried
have
rice.
they have some of it here. You can get fried rice. Never seen General Tso's, but the funny thing is that Chinese food and Japanese food are very late imports to India.
Okay.
So, so the Indians don't know how to use chopsticks as a rule.
I don't either.
The
So
way,
I don't hate them.
but the way most Americans are, they've been exposed to it. So even if they don't know how, they know what the deal is. And our favorite Asian restaurant here has placemats that have that have instructions for using the chopsticks. So they teach people how to use chopsticks, which I thought was funny because we
I have
do. I mean,
tried, and I still
mhm.
never get it. I've even tried with the kid chopsticks, where like they're still
Uh-huh.
connected. That they try. I'm like, just give me a
Yeah.
fork. I'm okay. You can laugh at me. It's cool.
There's like you can wrap it with a rubber band. I don't actually know how this is done. I've just read about somebody who had like a chopstick starter kit that they would produce, and it was just a little gadget that you slid over your chopsticks, and it made it so that it held them together so you could manipulate them better without dropping them. And I thought that was pretty clever.
I think a fork is pretty clever, so I'll stick
Fork is
with
clever.
that. I've tried, and I can't even blame this on that coordination loss that I got with the head
Uh-huh.
injury. Because
Oh,
quite
yeah.
frankly, even before I couldn't.
Okay. So this is a long-standing thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and the same with names. Like when I get people's name wrong, I'll totally blame it on the TBI. But when I was crappy at names before the head injury,
Mhm. Mhm.
that was just I could remember faces. Like I remember items like, when I worked at a coffee shop, I could remember their drink orders. I could remember their pets if they go if they're walking where I do my walk, like, oh, you're Fluffy's dad, right? But your name,
Mm,
nope, I got
I
nothing.
don't remember. Yeah.
People aren't as important to me as the coffee and the pets, I guess.
That's probably true.
I mean, I gotta have some priorities.
Memorable anyway. Yeah.
All right, so we're going to end the food cast. We're going to air this beautiful commercial, and then we're going to come back and talk about the book series that brought us here. And because it's you, I figured we would pick a friend to do our advertisement. So thank you,
Cool.
Jana.
The necromantic magic of the Great Lich has held sway over the world for 100 years. Can a young knight of the god of death and the last priestess of the goddess of life destroy him before their homeland falls? The only survivor of his convoy, journeyman knight Darian, is entrusted with an ancient scroll and one mission. Return the scroll to the High Temple in Hothan, no matter the cost. He never expected that journey to include stumbling onto the last healer in the world. Now he must take not only the scroll but the woman across the kingdom to safety, each step dogged by the relentless undead. Death's Night, Book 1 in the completed War of the Lich series by Matthew T. Summers and Jenna Ray.
All right.
All right. Thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude. So we appreciate that. Obviously, thank you, Jana, for sponsoring this episode. She would probably, we could probably tell her about it, but I think she's at one of her mini conferences she does this time of the year.
She's at a conference right now. So.
All right. So we obviously had you on to talk about, because when we did the War Master series, you mentioned some of your other ones that sounded interesting. So we ended up booking all of them to get them out there. So we're going to talk about the Crown of Tremontane series. So first off, did I say the name right?
Pretty much, yeah. It's Tremontane.
All right. So what is the story behind the name first?
Okay. So it's actually pretty basic. There is a city in northern Utah called Tremonton, and we would drive past it or through it. In fact, I'm not sure if we ever drove through it. It's just that the sign is there on the highway saying that this is, next stop Tremonton. And we would drive past it on the way to visit my family in Eastern Washington. And when I originally came up with the idea for this series, it was some 20 or 30 years ago. And it was just a story about a girl. And then I saw that name and I thought, oh, that's clever. I wonder. And so I played around with mixing up the letters and adding letters, and I came up with Tremontane. And so it's derived from that northern Utah town.
I will say that Utah has some of the strangest town and city names
Mm-hmm.
and street names of anywhere in the
Mm-hmm.
Union.
Well, our family fights over the pronunciation of the town Manaway, which is spelled Mantua, like in India, Mantua. And my son insists that it needs to be Mantua because that's just, it's spelled that way. And his wife, who is actually she's lived in Utah all her life, she says, no, it's actually Manaway. And he's like, I refuse to accept that. So our family is fond of that particular town. And it's one of those, you know, how they'll, like, the question, say something about your town that proves that you're a local, that you're, you know, from there, from your state. And so Manaway is one of those things that outsiders do not pronounce correctly.
For
So
us,
yeah,
it's
one of
Norfolk.
many names. Yeah.
People say Norfolk, and I'm like, nope, that's not how I say it. Norfolk. It's Norfolk.
Mhm.
Shut up. You're wrong. But so there's always that one place. Although, like I said, you guys are right up there with Australia if you want weird city names that you can, like, make it sound like it's from a foreign place. Although Australia, some of those are so weird. If I put it in, they're like, okay, you're just being absurd right now. I'm like, no, I promise it's a real place.
You're just making up letters. Yeah.
Right. Some of the fantasy, though, the trend is I think they get like the Campbell's soup where it's got the alphabet soup, and they'll just like spoon it up. And I'm like, what can I spell with this? All right, I got a name.
Yeah, I call it Scrabble tile names because they just, you know, mix up the Scrabble tiles and pull a handful and spread them out, and that's the name.
So before we start talking about the series specifically, obviously because you've written other things, and it's been a little bit since you've done a solo interview, could you give us a Reader's Digest version of the other series that you've written so people know what to look for if they want to check out your stuff?
Okay, so there are a lot. The Last Oracle is my contemporary fantasy series. It's about a young woman who becomes the custodian of an oracular bookstore. So you go into the bookstore with a question, and the oracle chooses a book for you that answers the question, and you have to interpret it. And she is part of a war against magical monsters from beyond our reality. But that's her job in this war, is to be the custodian of the bookstore. And then there's all these fighters going on, and that was a real challenge because she's stuck there. She has to be in the bookstore, and so finding ways for her to have adventures and be important in the series and in fighting the war was really challenging. But it's probably my most popular series, I think, because contemporary fantasy is an easier sell than, say, secondary world fantasy. But there's that one. There's The Extraordinaries, which is historical fantasy set during the Regency and the Napoleonic Wars. And it's basically people with psionic powers fighting Napoleon. And each book has a different main character with a different power. And so each book explores, I just thought it'd be fun to figure out, well, if you had the power to teleport anywhere in the world, how would you use that? And what are the limitations? And how would that fit with the war that they're fighting? And that one is probably closest to my heart because I worked really hard on making the historical parts real, and I had a lot of good help on that. That was a difficult series. So okay, so Last Oracle, Extraordinaries. There's this one that we'll talk about. There's the Dark Goddess series, which is about a paladin of the Dark Goddess who's the good guy. So she's the good guy, and her sister is the bright one, and she's the evil one.
And And we did that episode where we talk about it within season 5. It's about a month or two ago, I think.
Yeah, it's been a little while. Yeah. So it's about a paladin and the werewolf companion that she falls in love with. There's the Company of Strangers series, which is kind of like War Master, which is fantasy adventure based on gaming. And Company of Strangers I wrote before I knew what lit RPG was, which is probably just as well because it would have been lit RPG, and I think it's better as it is. But it's based on years and years of playing role-playing games, fantasy role-playing games, and it's about a group of people who go out on quests in a world that has suffered a catastrophe several hundred years in the past, where all of their biggest magics failed. And so they find remnants and artifacts from that time, and then they can sell them. So they're like magical scavengers, but they have a bigger purpose. They have another quest that drives them. And oh gosh, I've got like 10 series.
There's you had that many. Are all of them, with the exception of the War Master, which you're still writing, are the other ones done? Mostly?
The Last Oracle has a sequel series called The Living Oracle, which picks up after the conclusion of The Last Oracle, and gives them a new adventure. That one's in progress. And then the Dark Goddess series is still being written. So that's 3 active series.
And 7 finished ones?
Yeah, and yeah, the other ones are much shorter and smaller. There's the Dragon series, about where the dragon is the main character, and there's the Convergence trilogy about a young woman who's pulled from her world into another and has to work with the mages of that world to keep both their worlds from being destroyed. And then I have a couple of books that it barely qualifies as a series. They're both set in the same world, and they're my only books that have male protagonists, so male POV characters.
Okay.
I think that's it. Yeah.
So was that harder for you to write, the male POV?
Not really, actually.
You have sons, so I can't imagine it was that much.
Yeah, I have a lot of masculine tendencies of my own. I tend to be very direct in speaking and not very girly in a lot of ways. And so some aspects of masculine thinking were more natural than others. And then my husband was a good reference, and he would say, yeah, this is a thing that a man would not do. And so I would change it.
That's convenient.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're here to talk about, obviously, the Crown of Tremontane. You talked about where the title came from. So can you tell us, like, just to start with, if you're using the movie theater rating scale, and we use that because it's kind of universal, everyone really knows what that means. Where would you rate this on, like, is it G to R range?
I would say almost all of it is PG-13 for language and violence. The sex is mostly fade to black. In Servant of the Crown, they go a little further in terms of sex. They don't actually, have explicit sex that's on the page or anything, but there's more touching of body parts and things like that. I consider it very mild, but one of my favorite reviews of that book is just 2 words, and they said, "not clean." And I consider that a mark of honor.
We could get up there. My favorite review of one of my books, unfortunately, Amazon yeeted it a couple years ago. They did the purges of the various reviews for reasons nobody quite figured out. And somebody reviewed my military sci-fi series and said it was like a 12-year-old with ADHD wrote gun porn. And I'm like, dude, I could not have written better ad copy if I tried. Please let me keep this.
That's fantastic. Yes, right? That's great. Yeah.
So sometimes I laugh at some of the bad reviews because they're like, dude, you just sold me the book. Military sci-fi with too much cussing and violence? What?
That sounds good to me.
Right? I mean, like, that's what I'm looking for.
So this is so Servant of the Crown. If you are really a purist about no sexual activity at all, you will probably find that problematic. It's like one scene. So to me, it's like, okay, I know why I wrote it. I know why I did it, and I stand by that. But it was the third book I ever wrote. And I think if I were writing it 20 or 30 books down the line, I would have found a different way to do it. But it was the only way I could make things work, was by including that scene. So
I have written scenes like that before. I totally get it. I did one where they had basically there was no FTL, so they basically you cryo froze people between worlds, which means if you think about the implications of that, you can mess with genealogy. Like you could go to sleep at 18 and wake up and meet your great grandchildren, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so, and in fact, the main character in the main series that this happened in actually meets his twin brother, who's like old enough to be his dad physically, but they clearly shared a womb. And so I had him having relations with a woman because I wanted to hint at that there were kids later, because that was going to come into play if the series had gone longer. And when I did the first version of the scene, my mother was my first line editor, and she sent it back. I don't know what you and your wife are doing, but practice and then rewrite this. And after that, I was just so traumatized. I have just never gone back to it.
Oh, that's funny though.
For you, I'm telling you, it wasn't funny for me at the time.
I'm sure. I'm sorry. It was very serious.
Right. You're not laughing at me. You're laughing with me.
That's right. Or near you.
Okay. So it is PG 13, maybe
PG-13,
light R for that one book.
Light R. Yeah. It's like I've seen. I don't know. The rating system is kind of weird anyway. So it's iffy. I get readers who are like, yeah, this is no big deal, and I get readers who are like, oh, I can't believe you put this in there. I can never trust you again. And
it's really, are you talking about the rating system from the 80s, from the 90s,
no,
from the
well,
2000? Because it
exactly,
just
yeah, it keeps morphing. I mean, the Abyss shows the woman's breasts when they're trying to resuscitate her, and it's non-sexual, but they are clearly there. And I think that different times have different ideas, or even different movies. I think that they look at the movie and see, what is this, and I hope they do. I hope they are cautious like this when they choose a rating and include the intent of the movie creators when they make those decisions. So anyway, but yeah, I'll stand by that. It's PG-13 with the understanding that there is one scene in Servant of the Crown that might be R.
I have seen The Abyss. I didn't remember that scene, but it's also possible they edited it out for the made-for-TV version.
That's
so I just
almost certainly true. Yeah, that's almost certainly true.
So, okay, so we've got the rating. I'm going to pull the art up for everyone to look at. Could you tell us the origin story for like the universe, where you came for the idea for the Tremont series?
Okay, so the one you can't see in the green one, okay, was the story I told myself. Yeah, back one more. There you go. That one. Okay.
So what's green for you and green for me?
Oh, right. I forgot. I'm sorry. I forgot. Yeah. Okay. This is green. Okay. The Agent of the Crown. This was the bedtime story I told myself for years and years and years about this girl who was a princess, and she was secretly her uncle's spy. So she was an agent. She would go to parties, and she would listen to conversations, and she would pick up things that her uncle needed to know, and she would bring them back. And then he calls on her to go to this other city, this town on the frontier, and pretend to be just an ordinary person to investigate something that's going on in that town. And so it's a fish out of water story, and she falls in love, she makes friends, she discovers who she really is when she isn't pretending to be a ditzy princess. And so I had most of that story, and it's funny because I haven't told myself bedtime stories for decades because I'm writing them now. And so it's kind of weird to look back and think, I was telling this story over 30 years ago. is when I came up with this. And for the series, what happened was I had written my first book, Emissary, and I really enjoyed the process. It was fun. I had a good time. It was a good book. And so I talked to my husband. I said, I'd really like to do more of this, but I don't have any ideas. And ideas are very difficult for me to come by for anything that could be viably a book. I'll have thoughts like, I don't know, what if unicorns came back from the fairyland where they've been segregated for years, and that's just a thought. I didn't at the time have the ability to turn that into a book. And so my husband said, well, don't you have anything that interests you? And I said, well, there's this one story that I keep telling myself, but it doesn't have a plot. It's just about this girl. And so he helped me come up with the plot that hangs it all together. That is why she is going to this town. And from there, I wrote the book, and I created the world, and I wanted it to be very much not low fantasy, because that implies something different, but low magic fantasy. I wanted there to be magic as the background, and I wanted it to be sort of a light version of our world's history, but not really any one particular country or time period. Just an alternate world. And Jana is the one who came up with she asked the questions that came up with the double-barreled magic system in this series. And my husband was the one who, like I said, came up with the plot. And then it all just sort of fit together. And when I finished writing it, I said, well, I have this other story. And that was the story of Servant of the Crown. And it was this girl's grandmother. So that was, a story when she was young. And it just kind of kept building. And every book, I made a little bit more of the world. And it got to where Rider of the Crown there. So that's Servant. That was the third book I wrote. And then the one with the gal in armor, Rider of the Crown, is the fourth book. And that was because I had... Order. Yeah, I wrote them out of order because I wrote Agent, and then I wrote Servant, and then there was a 50-year gap between those two books, and I needed to fill it in. Well, so it was, at that point, it was obviously a series about a family. And that's when it became the Crown of Tremontane series, because it's about the women of this family, whether they're born into it or whether they marry into it. And
I like the Arabic influence over here on the building, or maybe even Indian.
Oh yeah, that's she goes to a southern country that's very different from her own, and this one, that chick there, she's the queen, who is... she has the magical ability to heal herself without thinking about it. Her body just automatically heals. So I think Julian May referred to it as biokinetic autoredaction. So her body is constantly healing itself of all this damage, but it means that it's healing itself of the damage of aging, and she's never going to die, which is a disaster for a kingdom. You don't want a queen who might, get crazy and live forever, and her family would have nothing to do. And so she fakes her death, and she goes off, and that's where in Agent of the Crown, the main character meets her. She's her great aunt, basically. And then Voyager of the Crown takes place after all the others, and is her story, Zara's story.
Okay, and then obviously you've got the box set, and we link to both if you want to check them out. So at this point in time, when it comes to audiobook, we'll get into the actual book itself, because you kind of gave us a little bit of an overview. But there is an audiobook for the first one, Servant of the Crown. You talked in the pre-show, you said at some point in time you're going to come back, now that the rights have reverted, and do audiobook for the whole series at some point.
I'd like to, yeah. This is, I liked Okay, I've never actually listened to the production of Servant of the Crown because my former publisher arranged it, and they got Gemma Dawson, who is a fantastic narrator. I mean, I have listened to other of her books, but she's English, and I did not picture this series as being English people. I imagined them as sounding like Americans, and so that was kind of startling, and I don't know why it didn't occur to me that if she was doing it, of course they would be English. But she does things like in Servant of the Crown, the main hero is named Anthony, and she pronounces it the English way, Antony. And I'm sure there are other things.
So she pronounces it wrong, is what you're telling me.
Basically, that is not the right pronunciation. But I was so grateful that they were interested in producing the audiobook, that I didn't really feel like I could have any input. And they never did ask me. They just, I mean, they asked me to do it, but they didn't they never asked me to review the audio or, go through and do a final check. They just completely were responsible for all of it. And that was good and bad. Because, like I said, I would have said, don't say Anthony. But yeah, I would like to see these all. And this is, I should point out that the Crown of Tremontane series technically is actually 10 books long, and it starts with a much earlier book called Pretender to the Crown that is the second entry point. But I wrote that it happens 200 years before Servant of the Crown, and I wrote that one after. So I called it the Saga of Willow North, and Willow North is the legendary first queen of the North Dynasty. And that one is a trilogy, and then there's another trilogy in the middle that kind of bridges the gap between Willow's time and the Crown of Tremontane time. So technically they're all part of the series, but in general, until I get around to recovering everything and renumbering everything, this is where I have people begin, either with Servant of the Crown or with Pretender.
Okay. So the Second World Fantasy, obviously the main story is a saga about the Tremontane kingdom and the mm-hmm. women of that lineage. What can you tell us about the world writ large, other than we know at some point there's larger globe out there that they engage mm-hmm. with? So what can you tell us about the world?
So the world is... when I started, like I said, I just wanted sort of a basic, excuse me. I wanted a basic fantasy world that I could just have my character live in. And when I decided to write Pretender, 200 years earlier, I had to sort of cycle back and say, all right, well, what would their society be like 200 years before this? And I settled on a sort of late medieval, but fantasy medieval. So it's not like feudal or anything. It's just the technology level is at a certain point. And so in this world, starting in that series, in that story, Tremontane was ruled by the Valent family, and the Valent family was controlled by the Ascendants. And the Ascendants were people who had magical power and could do all sorts of things like telekinesis or detecting lies or healing, or they had some pretty powerful magic, but it was all dependent on their dowsers. And a dowser would draw from the magic that was inherent in the world. So it's like ley lines, really. There's places of concentration of magic, and they're scattered. But a dowser can sense where those are and pull the magic out of them and feed it to an ascendant. And the story of Willow is bringing that family to its knees because they were abusing people, and they were being autocratic and just being really basically bad people. And so because of the Ascendants, people are scared of magic. Well, to become an ascendant, you have to have what's called inherent magic, which is a ground level ability to work magic, and you're sort of passively absorbing it from the environment around you. So you can do small things, but you can't do the big stuff the ascendants do. And so that magical dichotomy, the duology, was the basis for the magic of the world. You had people who had inherent magic, who could wield the magic, and you had people who were dowsers, later known as devisers, who could find magic and manipulate it to go into something else. So either a person or a device. So this world has a lot of magical tech that's fueled by the magic of these devisers, and there's inventions and stuff. And so it became an exploration of how does society change if you've got this ground state, this assumption about magic and the things that it can do, and how does society change over the years. And so I went through and I had them go through different fashion periods. I had them go through different political like assumptions about how the world worked. I had them go through different technologies. One of the books is about the invention of the automatic sewing machine and how that changes the economy forever. And so what it ended up being in these 10 volumes was my exploration of an epic that wasn't about war and
or
conflict
peace.
or peace. No big fighting, no big battles, no big political conflicts. I am really terrible at politics. I don't enjoy writing them, and it's always a struggle because I feel like I'm not thinking properly. But I did what I could. And so that was my exploration of this country and their surrounding countries. You get to see the different cultures. You get to see how their societies are different from Tremontane's. Tremontane is pretty much an American stand-in, which is why I never thought of it as being British, because it was just, I live in the United States, and it was kind of the foundation for my, growing up, obviously. So there's that, and there's I'm talking about race relations, talking about the political aspect, talking about organizations that rise and fall. So, like, for example, in Pretender to the Crown, there's what's called scolias in the southern kingdom, and they're like little universities. And then when one of those southern people marries Willow North, they bring the Scholia north, and there's just one. And it's this great educational institution. Well, by the time of Servant of the Crown, it's become corrupt. And so I got to trace that from the beginning all the way through to its end. And I don't know. I think I really wanted to do that just because I wanted to see if I could, and draw conclusions and say, all right, if I establish this as the baseline, what implications does that have for society or anything else? And I love seeing those close up. My cover designer was fantastic. She referred to my covers as having to do Frankensteining, because she would take pieces from all different models and put them together, and at that distance you just can't tell. She was really good.
I like to, when the author's talking, I like to zoom in on various parts of the cover to look at the fine details, because it's just it's fun to me, and I think the authors dig it a little bit. But sometimes, like in this case, I'm like, I promised I wasn't zooming in on the girl. I wanted you to see the buildings behind her, because you can't always
That's right.
just where everything is, because obviously I didn't put the cover, but right behind her is that castle, which I think is pretty cool.
I like that castle.
I like that it has depth. Some of the covers are like they would do the same, woman with a pose or man with a pose, but then there's no depth behind them. and it makes it static, whereas this layered approach gives it that three-dimensional kind of lived-in vibe that I really like in a cover.
Yeah, and Clarissa did a fantastic job. In fact, she took a sabbatical from cover design right as I was needing covers for the middle trilogy, and I freaked out because I knew I could not get I'd have to go with somebody else. I couldn't not publish, or I'd have to just put it aside. And she said, here's some recommendations. And so I went with one of them, and he shows me, he designs it, and he says, okay, here's the cover, here's the first draft. And he shows me, and it is exactly like all the other ones. He had the font right, he had the placement right. And I said, what, this is amazing. He said, well, I talked to Clarissa and she gave me all the assets. And I was just astonished that, in fact, I think he must have done that one. I don't think Clarissa did that one, the one that you're showing now. Because this one came very late in the process. So he might have done that one. Anyway, so there's no, you can't see it. He does a great job.
All the covers are really good. I dig that. So when you said the Crown of Tremontane, I was thinking of Johnny Tremaine might have been where you started from, which is the book about the American Revolution.
Yeah, I know that one. Yeah,
Forbes, I think. My memory could be
Esther Forbes. Esther
Forbes. Is it Esther or it's ESTHER? Esther. I don't know if the H is pronounced or not, but
yes, it's Esther.
Anyway, I thought that was the vibe you were going for. So when you were mentioning like the narrator for the first one did a British one, I'm like, no, well, I mean, I guess, but only if you're fighting yourself.
Yeah, that's right. No, it is meant to be American English, and I mean, I wasn't going in it thinking, oh, I'm going to celebrate the United States and I'm going to write an alternate history of the United States. It wasn't like that. It was just I wanted what is traditionally considered an American frame of mind, which is looking to the future and trying new things and just all the good things that I felt about the United States growing up and as an adult, all the things that made it good. And so that's kind of where that came from. Is I figured, and like I said, this was my second, third, and fourth books, and I did not know in a lot of ways what I was doing. I was just making a stab at it. And the first version of Agent of the Crown went through 4 different revisions, which is a lot for me. That never happens now. Servant of the Crown, I had a really hard time coming up with the second half of the book because it was not a part of the story I had told myself, and all I knew was the initial conflict between the main character and the Playboy Prince. And so there was a lot of learning I did on this, and I tried to make it as easy on myself as I could by writing about people that I knew, or character types that I was familiar with.
So that's interesting because my process, like people say, oh, how do you like come up with your stories? I'm like, no. My question is, how do you turn them off? Like I never am out of ideas that don't sound cool. And no short story I've ever written that I couldn't see turning into a 12-book arc. So the idea that you started on the opposite end. So for me, it was learning how to focus it down into the individual stories within the framework. Right.
Yeah. And this is, I think that's, I was at first, when I first was writing books, feeling like there was something wrong with me because everyone I knew was always talking about, oh, the idea fairy is challenging me all the time. And I just have so many ideas. I don't know what to do with them. And I'm like plodding along with my one idea at a time. And at the end of every book, I would feel like, okay, that's it. I'm done. I have no more ideas. It's never going to happen again. And then I would come up with an idea and I would write that book. And so it's only been in the last year that I have had more ideas, and many of them have to do with following up on the stories I've already written. So more series, more books, different series, spin-off characters, things like that. So they're still all like that. But I think it has been a real advantage because I am focused, and the War Master book that I'm working on now is my 70th book. And I've done that. I started writing in 2013. So being able to stay focused and not being plagued by all these ideas that look interesting and can be distracting when you're struggling has been a real benefit to me.
You said 2013?
2013.
You wrote an average of 12 books a year.
Yes.
Full-length novels, or are you counting like novellas and short stories?
No, they're all novels. I don't count my short stories.
That is insane. So I actually, I have written, so my Sleeping Legion series is closed. I mean, like, as the series looped, because it was always intended to loop back into the main series. There were issues with the publisher in the main series because I didn't own the main series. I wrote someone else's Playground. And so when he had plot changes that occurred on his end, I had to adjust fire. So, my several book arc became a 4-book arc because I had to wrap up to get them back. My characters met up with his, and then he took the story over. And so when we did the box set years later, I had to, well, I didn't have to, but I wrote a new short story because Terry Mixon used to do that. He would do his box sets, but he'd include a new short story. And from a marketing position, it makes sense because his existing readers, if he puts it for 99 cents on launch day, they'll all buy it. So 99 cents for a short story, I mean, it's okay. That's not bad.
Yeah.
And then he put it back to whatever the normal price is going to be. And it boosted sales on his end to tweak the algorithms, but it also meant people would go and buy, multiple versions of it. So, I mean, from like a marketing perspective, it was genius. I'm like, well, if I ever do a box set, I'll do the same thing. So I went to write a short story, and I struggled so hard to go back to the universe, not because I didn't know the universe. Like, I could still picture all of it in my head, but my writing style had changed so much that going backwards was just difficult. The publisher was like, JR, just write how you would write it now. Like, people understand authors evolve. But the idea of like going back to the series that you've been working on in your head since 2013, how do you keep that consistent from a authorial voice point of view that would unify the series, since, you've got so much difference between you in 2013 as an author and you now as an author?
Well, some of it is that I have not always wanted to be an author. I have always written things, but most of what I wrote was literary analysis and reviews, and I wrote a few short stories here and there, and I tried to write novels. I was not ready. I feel like everything I was writing up until that point when I started Emissary was preparing me to be able to write a novel and make it work. So I had a lot of writing behind me. And I think that what that meant was that as I go into these books, my authorial voice is very set. I'm not really experimenting with it. The way it sounds, and I know this because I'm getting Emissary ready for a 10th anniversary release. So I went back through it, and there are stylistic changes, but the voice still sounds very much the same. So whatever I've done has stayed pretty consistent over the years. I think you could probably still see that I've refined on it. I hope so. I hope I keep improving. But overall, the sound is still very similar.
Okay. So right now, this is a 4-book arc, and you can either get the ebook as a box set, or you can get them individually when the audiobooks come out. Do you foresee coming back to this world? You mentioned that you have not really prequels. You have more novels in this universe that happened before Servant of the Crown, which is the first one, because you wrote them in almost a Star Warsian order. In that you didn't write them chronologically. At some point in time, presumably you will not republish them, like reorganize and recover them all into one unified series.
Yes.
Which would only change the reading order potentially,
Right.
and the covers. You're not actually going to change any of the text. Well,
No,
back
I
matter, but
don't do that.
yeah, you'd have to update the back matter and that kind of stuff. But that's nothing but a thing. So, how long do you see? Like, are you done with this world? Are you going to keep going on after the fourth book in this series, the Voyager of the Crown?
I actually just had a fan write to me asking if I had any interest in going back to Tremontane, because I think it was her favorite series. And I realized, because I was thinking about it, there's no reason I couldn't continue writing the stories that happen afterward. You know, my main character in Agent of the Crown has children, and I did revisit the world briefly a couple of years back when I wrote a holiday novella that's set after, or no, it's set at the same time as Voyager of the Crown. So it's it kind of overlaps a little, but they're in two different places and it's different characters. And so I wrote that, and I realized that Tulane, who is the main character of Agent of the Crown, is someone who grew up with me, and it would be really hard to see her grow old and eventually pass away as the generations proceed. So it feels to me like there's no more stories in this world. I would love it if I came up with something that I could write, because I love this series. I love this world. The characters are all really interesting to me. I like writing about powerful women who do interesting things. And I like writing about men who are still men and are companions to them, without being, beta males or anything awful. But yeah, I think if I came back to this, I would have to have a really compelling idea. It's possible. I'm just not sure.
Or you move to a different kingdom and kind of repeat the formula.
I could do that. I think it'd be interesting to write more about. There's three kingdoms, not necessarily kingdoms, but you know what I mean. 3 countries that are close to Tremontane, and it would be interesting to write sort of side stories about them. So it wouldn't be the Crown of Tremontane; it would be adjacent to it, and I wouldn't say that's impossible. But now I have 3 active series that I'm writing already, and with War Master coming to a close, the possibility of writing the sequel to that would mean that I still have 3 active series, and people are not happy with me that I'm not as devoted to the Living Oracle as I am to some of the others. So like I say, it's a possibility. It's probably unlikely, but yeah.
So if you could live in this world, the setting world for the Crown of Tremontane, is that somewhere you'd want to go?
Oh yeah, I'd live there. They maybe not in the time of Willow North, but certainly by the time of the Crown of Tremontane that starts with Servant, they have indoor plumbing. They have all sorts of technology. They have good food, and I think it'd be interesting. So yeah.
So they also have. Do they have magic outside of her bio whatever live forever juice?
Yeah. What they have is they've got. I mean, she has the kind of magic that she absorbs passively from the lines of power that are all around her. So the closer she is to one of those, the faster her healing is accelerated. But the magic that they use is bound up in these items, these devices. So if they have flush toilets, it's because the device manages the flush toilet. And they have, in Voyager, she's dealing with the invention of the radio. And they have pens that write by themselves, and they have just all sorts of things that make life easier because they're very practical people. And so there's other places in the world where the magic is more for ornament or for show, but in Tremontane, they want things that do stuff, and they want to make their lives more comfortable. So that's really the magic. So there's the magic, and then other people have that same kind of magical talent. So like the main character of Agent of the Crown can hear when someone's telling her a lie. It sounds funny in her ears, so that makes her a really good agent, because if she can get people to talk directly to her, she can tell if they're lying. And there's her uncle, the king, who knows where his family are. Anywhere in the world, he knows where his family members are. And so it's that kind of very minor magical talent, but because of the history of the kingdom, people are scared of even that. And so it could threaten their rule if the people in Tremontane knew that their king was tainted. And the story I wanted to tell that I couldn't figure out how to manage was what happens after Voyager of the Crown, when the king is outed, when the royal family is outed as being magical. And there were too many loose ideas and not one that was enough to make it work. So there's that possibility too. There's the possibility of moving on one more generation from Voyager.
So the lady that has the ability to self-heal from the absorbing the passive power, at a certain point in time, is she going to de-age instead of just not aging? I mean, like at a certain point in time, she can...
No, she ages because it's not totally perfect. There's only so much it can do to repair her, and it's slow in some cases. So like if she's injured, it will heal itself, but it'll take a day. She arranges for the way that she escapes being the queen and goes off on her own is she fakes her death by having someone shoot her through the head, because then she recovers from that, but it takes 7 days. So she's aging, but she's aging very slowly.
So she's not going to get younger.
No, she wouldn't get younger. I think that would be a little odd, don't you? I mean,
the Benjamin Button thing, yeah.
Yeah, aging backward into being a baby. I mean, that seems really odd to me. So
yeah, and it makes you question how they're born, because that poor mother. No, I just one of the things I think I see in modern writing is people don't always. It's essentially the Socratic method: if this, then that; if that, then what. And so people will think of that. I've got this really shiny idea. Okay, but then what? And then what after that? And like play that logic tree down to see what it looks like. And they just stick with the bright, shiny idea without weighing in the implications of it.
Yeah.
And so that's where you end up with readers. You might not use the same words an author would use, but something in the story will feel off. It's because, there was stuff they overlooked, or there was, they just didn't think out the natural consequences. Well, if I have the teleporter, why don't I just teleport a bomb onto the enemy ship and then end the war? Looking at you, Star Trek.
Right.
And sometimes mistakes happen. Like nobody's perfect, and this trick is to make a reason later about why. Oh, we never did that because, right?
Yeah. Because there's a difference between making a mistake and just not thinking it through. And I love thinking it through. I mean, every book I've ever written has been a matter of, okay, here's where I start. What does that mean? What are the implications of this? What happens next? And if that's the thing that happens next, well, what are the implications of that? And playing with that. And I think you see this most in my series, The Extraordinaries, where it's alternate history as well as being fantasy. And so you have to say, well, if in that case, if Napoleon is telepathic and can control the emotions of everybody around him, well, that's pretty powerful because your emotions affect your thoughts. And if your thoughts are affected, then how is that any different from mind control? And if he's capable of doing that, then what would people do to defend him if he could make them love him? And so it just kept going. And so, like I said, I think it's very important in alternate history that you drill down into what's the implication of this? If I change this, if they, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a historical battle. Pick a historical battle. You know them. Anyway,
if he won Waterloo.
Yeah, what happens if Napoleon wins at Waterloo? Well, okay, how did he do it? What happened to Wellington's forces that he won?
Well, historically, he was trying to divide and conquer, and then they met in time. So in order for him to win, he would have had to piecemeal the two different armies. And if he piecemealed the two different armies, presumably Wellington was the stronger one. His army would have been intact. I don't remember. I think it was the Prussians was the other army he was going against. And if he wipes out the Prussian army, what does that look like? Because that's the logical solution for him. Mm-hmm. And he saw that too, because he was going for the Prussian army first. So that's a lot of fun. And then what does that look like? Mm-hmm. So if I was ever going to write alt history, for me, it'd be the American Revolution. Harry Turtledove's famous Guns of the South, where, this racist organization from South Africa during the apartheid brings the AK-47 to the Confederates. And, they're trying to make the world they wanted by not having the South win.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and so you get an AK-47, which is roughly 60 rounds a minute, versus the standard, 1861 Springfield, which is 6 if you're good.
6 if you're lucky,
and so I started thinking, well, what would happen if you brought, something on par with that to the Revolution, where you're talking 3 or 4 rounds a minute if you're really good and it's, a musket, and if it's a rifle, okay, maybe.
If it's a rifle, you have to train really hard, and you can maybe get 3. You're more likely to get 2 rounds a minute. Yeah,
right,
and
or 1.5. On aggregate.
If that, yeah.
And so, I'm just thinking, when they land at Trenton, or the landing in New York, one 50 caliber machine gun on the beach, and that's game over for that war.
Yeah.
And then what? Because people don't realize that the French and Indian War was called the 7 Years' War everywhere else. Americans tend not to, and so both the war that led up to the Revolution and the Revolution were almost the first 2 world wars. As widespread as the conflict was. And so that gets you thinking when you talk about these alt histories, it's the ripple in the pond that just keeps spreading outward.
Yeah.
And now we're talking about your other series, and we got you here for the Crown of Tremontane.
For something else, yeah.
So we'll save that for a future episode, because that series, we've booked you to come and talk about that one. And it'll air sometime in April, because we're recording it around a potential sale, so they can get a discount on the books. But yeah, that intrigues my historian mind. But you did that with the Crown of Tremontane, which is where we started from. You said, if this power, then what does it mean? And then what does it mean that this is what it means? And that's generally the fun of the world building for you. Is that because you've done so much of that gaming?
I think it's just always been something where I liked pursuing consequences of events, and some of that is from when I was 4th or 5th grade, maybe, because we moved around a lot when I was a kid, and I was in Denver at the time, and I was in the gifted program, and it was an astonishingly good program that really wanted to train you to think. And so we had all these activities and things we had to do. We had to learn to do actual research papers and programs, and some of the activities we did were very much geared toward, all right, here's where you're starting. Well, what does that mean? And can you prove it, that this is what it means? Where's your evidence? And that felt like a puzzle to me. That was I love puzzles. I love intellectual challenges. And so this was so pursuing a thought to its logical end is something I enjoy doing. And I think that came into play when I was planning different books. and doing the world building and just thinking, all right, here's an idea that I have that I want to be important. I want this to be something that matters in the world. Well, if I have this, then I can't have this other thing, but I can have these three things that follow naturally from whatever it is. And then the opposite too. I mean, when you have an idea and you want it to do something that maybe doesn't naturally follow, then how do I make it work? How do I make this so that it is a natural result of what I want to do? And all of that is just a great big puzzle, and I love it.
So, obviously, we're wrapping up since we've moved on to your other series. Clearly, the Tremontane episode is winding down, and so, given that you love those puzzles, at any point in time, do you foresee yourself writing mysteries?
I have written 2 mysteries that are fantasy. They're in fact, one of them is in the Tremontane series. It's Scholar of the Crown. It's in the middle, and it's a murder mystery. And I forget what the other one was. So I've written 2 stories that, and View from Castle Always, and they are mysteries. But I haven't really ever thought about writing, say, a true mystery, like a straight up contemporary or historical mystery, even though I love reading them. I think because the world building is something that I enjoy so much that setting something in our world, if it isn't, say, alternate history, is more difficult. It's why I kind of struggled with my contemporary fantasy, because it's, I was looking for ways to make it interesting to me when the setting is our world, our time, modern America. So I think that might be the reason that I don't want to write a straight up mystery, because in general, it was really enjoyable writing those 2 books. That was a lot of fun because that is a puzzle and it's a challenge. So I liked that. But, I don't know. Barbara Handley went from writing fantasy to writing historical fiction, and Lois McMaster Bujold went from writing science fiction to writing fantasy, and they just, seems to have worked for them. So who knows? Maybe 10 years from now, I'll be writing something completely different.
Okay. So as we wrap this up, what are you working on now? You said you're finishing up the War Master series. Mm-hmm. When do you foresee that being finished? I know obviously you're on book 4 or 5 with the release schedule, I think now.
Book 6 is coming out probably, it's coming out the 18th of February. And okay. So that's book 6. And there are going to be 10. I'm working on book 10. And that, once I'm finished with that, I'm going to evaluate, because I would like to jump right into another lit RPG series. And my husband gave me an idea for a 3rd lit RPG series that would be set in the War Master universe, with completely unrelated characters. And so I no longer have the problem of worrying that this is my last book ever. I have plenty of things to keep me busy. So I will have to decide which of my 3 series I'm going to pursue next.
So this episode will drop the week before, because this airs on the 12th.
Right, yeah.
So book 6 will not have been out yet. Right. So we'll have to get you on to talk about the whatever the next lit RPG. I'm really enjoying those lately. Some of them get a little too crunchy with the numbers. Like it almost pulls you out of the story. So I like it when they mix them a little bit better.
Yeah, me too.
If you write the follow-on series in that world, are you going to isekai somebody else there as well, Portal Fantasy them in, or are you going to start with just locals?
Nope. It'll be somebody comes into this world who is from a farm league baseball team and is made a staff sworn who fights with a baseball bat. Of course, he has to have it made.
I was going to say, because you don't really bring anything with you in your version of the lit RPG.
That's right. He doesn't. He doesn't bring. Well, he could. I mean, that's totally possible. If I was
going to say, he doesn't necessarily have to die to transport himself.
That's right. Well, the idea of them dying so that they can't get back is really, for me, a convenience, so I don't have to write the ongoing saga of I'm trying to find my way home. But I'm increasingly attached to the people here, and oh, it's dramatic and horrible, and I get bored with that. So
I think one thing I learned in the military in general is how quickly you can adapt to the status quo, no matter how miserable it is. So
right.
I think people underestimate how long, or maybe they overestimate. I don't think they quite realize how quickly their person is just, they're going to adapt to their new normal.
Yeah, I think
You
so.
can look at the people who came to the Americas from England and they walked away from everything, and letters take, 4 months to get there. And like, do I think they spent the whole time whinging about, oh, I can't, I got to save? Well, no, this is my new life now. Let's make it work.
That's right.
And I think every time you talk about explorers, you end up, or people that go somewhere to colonize, you get that same mentality. So I don't think you have to tell the story that way. I think it's just an easy crutch for a plot line.
I think it's emotionally demanded by readers, in the sense that nobody wants to believe that that's true. They see the drama of, oh, I left my family behind, I left my girlfriend behind, I left my job behind, I left all these things behind. And I think it's like you say, I think they overestimate how long it takes for you to get used to being somewhere else. But it's like, any other story where somebody's had a loss. I just think that it's better if you're telling a story about them moving on than if you're telling a story about them wallowing and trying to get back what they've lost. So I think the temptation is there. I think that's kind of an expected story, if that makes sense.
Well, the other option is when you kill off their body on Earth, you can have them be a normie, might be a little overweight, maybe not so good looking, and suddenly their new body is like they're suddenly McStud, or
I'm in favor of that.
Yeah, you're the new femme fatale if it's a woman character, because why not? Magic exists, so why not, right? And so it's somewhat of a wish fulfillment by dying and waking up in a super awesome body.
Yeah.
The other fun I've seen, and then like I said, we'll wrap it up, and you can tell us how we can track you down online. But the other thing I've seen talked about in some of the author podcasts, but I've never seen anyone actually do, is have them do the gender swapped bodies when they come back. So like, obviously, Freaky Friday kind of vibe. I think it would be even more. It'd be fun if you didn't take it too seriously, like the guy realizing how out of balance he is because now he's got things on his chest.
Yeah.
or the female, but like, how do I aim this thing? It's doing weird things in the morning. Like, I'm keeping it family friendly, but dudes, you know what I'm saying. If you're married, like certain things happen in the morning. So like, the body humor that invites, where you could have fun. And again, you got a different way to get someone used to a new world, because now it's also a new body. And what does that mean for everything for your, there's just so much fun to isekai people, because you can mind F them.
Yes.
So,
yes.
All right. Well, I look forward to seeing that series and having you come on and talk about that one as well. So as we wrap this to a close, how can listeners and viewers find you on the wild interwebs?
Okay. So my website is melissamcshanewrites.com. And that will lead you to a place that shows all my books that I really need to update the front page, because it's still showing Dungeon Spiteful as my new book. And that was a long time ago. But it has all my books, and it has my storefront, which, the link to my storefront, so you can buy books directly from me if you wish. And you can also find me. I have a Facebook group. I'm not on there as much as I used to be, but you can find me on Facebook. You can follow me on Amazon as an Amazon author, get updates from my new releases. They'll send out like newsletters that say, a new book by an author you follow is available, and then you've got that. On my website, you can also sign up for my newsletter. There's a little button there, and that goes out monthly and has announcements of things and sales and stuff about what I'm writing and how it's going. And you can also, recently, I am on Goodreads just writing reviews of stuff I'm doing for fun. It is not as an author promoting myself. I just have a bunch of friends and we all write reviews and we all read them. And so if you're interested in what I'm reading and want to see a taste of what my literary analysis is like, you can find me on Goodreads.
Okay. And this is the part, dear listener, where I remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right book, so do your part. And my dream for 2025, the other platforms are going to come up and catch up to Amazon with the searchability, the author pages, the ability to notify people when the authors they follow have new books, because that would be amazing if they could make that happen for me. Yes. And I will warn you, dear listener, that just because I've tracked it with authors I know, there is no rhyme or reason to when you actually get the alert that the book is live. Sometimes I'm getting the alert 2 months after I know the book is already out and I've already bought it and read it. So if you want it as it launches, her website or newsletter, probably your best bet. Yes. Now, I know one of the things I do with my newsletter is at the end, I'll tell stories from the Army. Because the readers seem to like it, and my branding is veteran writing. Do you show like pictures of what you're seeing in Kerala, India? Is it Kerala?
Kerala. It's Kerala. Yeah, that's right.
Are you like showing pictures of the kind of cool things you're seeing there? Because people could travel vicariously through you.
Yeah, I post pictures of the places I go, and I post pictures of my cats, and they're really cute. And yeah, I have Persian cats. I'm an American stereotype. It's terrible.
I think I was sick the day in the author creation process where they assigned you a cat. So I'm like one of the few authors I know without a cat. But yeah, it's such a cliche at this point.
It is.
Okay, so that is where we can find you. You can find us, dear listener, on our Linktree, linktr.ee, Linktree / Blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, Linktree / Blasters and Blades Podcast, where we link to all the things, the BitChutes, the Rumbles, the YouTubes, the TikToks, maybe the Twitters, the Blasters and Blades Facebook group and Facebook page. Our email, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. For professional purposes only, people. Keep the shenanigans to Madam Stabby Stab over there on the Instagram, the Twitter, and the email. So far, I'm the only one sending her insulting letters, and she threatens to stab me. So the rest of you should have some fun with it, too. She's feeling left out. We have our website over there linked on the Linktree as well. Bunch of gobbledygook, so just click the link. You can support our podcast over there at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that it is for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will drink that coffee brand coffee till it pours out of their ears, and then I'll make them drink it again, people. All right. No, I really won't. That would actually be kind of gross. But thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades Podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time. We'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. And with that, I'm going to hit the end button. Thank you for coming on. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. It was great.